All right, everybody, we are here in the new Finger Lakes One TV studio, and I'm super excited for today's episode of the Melissa Killeleagh Show. We have a really special guest here with us in the studio today, and we have some stories to share. So for those of you who don't know me, Melissa Killeleagh, I am a community member here in Seneca Falls, New York, and absolutely in love with the Finger Lakes, which is part of why I have this show. It was a great way to be able to spread great news going on throughout the Finger Lakes, but also as the show evolves, one of the things that has come up for me is that I really love sharing other people's stories, and they're stories of people that I consider to be the everyday heroes, people who inspire, people who just urge us to be better, to be more, to do more, to just be part of this great community that we're part of. So anyways, last weekend, it was the Women's Right to Run. It was a 5K and 19K, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But I was actually at the run helping out the owner of Finger Lakes Woman magazine. I'm actually the community liaison for that publication. So if you see this out and about in the community, pick it up. A lot of great stories. There's actually a sampling of events going on in the area throughout the Finger Lakes. So we pulled from all of the different various chambers of commerce throughout the Finger Lakes. So you'll want to hold on to this one because you can find something to do for you and your family throughout the coming months. Our next issue will be out on July 1st. So this morning, what I wanted to share is, last week's run was so beautiful. I had an opportunity to shake hands with a wonderful woman named Catherine Switzer, who we're going to talk about here in just a minute. And it just sort of set off a series of connections and events that we're going to share today in the studio. So the first thing we're going to share is a clip from a project called the Story Tapestries, which is done by a woman who's down out of the DC area. Her name's Ariana Ross, and we'll be doing an interview with her next podcast. And in the meantime, the story tapestry that she featured was two community residents, one of whom you might recognize from a previous podcast or just because you're familiar with the Finger Lakes. But Karen and Stephen Beals are two wonderful people who are sharing that story of Catherine Switzer, who I shook hands with last weekend.
Welcome to Story Tapestries. We're Karen and Stephen Beals from beautiful Seneca Falls, New York, the birthplace of women's rights and quite possibly the inspiration for Bedford Falls of the classic film It's a Wonderful Life.
Now, does 50 years seem like a long time to you? I suppose it depends on how old you are. If you're 9 or 10 years old, it was the olden days. But 50 years ago was 1967, and the two of us were teenagers in 1967. And I'll tell you a secret. We don't feel old. We're not old, are we?
Oh, definitely not. What might surprise you is that 50 years ago in 1967, only men were allowed to run in the Boston Marathon. And it had been that way since the very first race back in 1897.
Now, even I think 1897 was a very long time ago.
That might seem strange to you that only men could run in this race because this year in 2017, more than 30,000 people ran in the Boston Marathon, and more than 13,000 of them were women.
That's impressive, but in 1967, women weren't allowed to run.
Well, that doesn't seem fair at all.
It sure doesn't. But something very odd happened in 1967.
And what was that?
A woman did run the Boston Marathon.
I thought you just said women weren't allowed to run.
I did. That's true. They weren't.
Well, which is it? Were they allowed to run or not?
Well, technically they weren't allowed to run according to the rules, but one person signed up as K. Switzer. That's the letter K, not the name K. And the people who accepted the application of K. Switzer didn't know the K stood for Catherine.
I understand one of the judges thought that was cheating. When Catherine Switzer was running past this judge, he ran onto the course and tried to pull her right out of the race.
That's true, but one of the men who was running right next to her pushed the judge out of the way.
And Catherine Switzer kept running.
And became the first woman ever to start and finish the the Boston Marathon.
She didn't win any prize or medal or anything like that, but she did something much better. She changed history. She helped open up not just running, but many sports for women.
That judge in Boston that tried to pull her out of the race, he wasn't the only person that tried to stop Catherine Switzer.
She faced a lot of public ridicule for what she did, but she kept fighting for the women's right to run and compete in all kinds of sports. You can learn more from her book.
And she's carrying on that fight 50 years later.
Last week, Catherine Switzer was right here in Seneca Falls
and signing her book.
Right here in Seneca Falls for the second annual Women's Right to Run 19K and 5K race.
19K. Now, I've heard of marathons and half marathons and 10Ks and 5Ks, but why 19K?
I know you already know the answer to that, but I bet our listeners don't. The 19K stands for the 19th Amendment to the Constitution that gave women the right to vote.
And I understand the money raised from the race went to a very good cause.
It did, absolutely. It went to the restoration of the Seneca Knitting Mill, an old stone knitting factory in Seneca Falls, so it can be converted into the new home of the National Women's Hall of Fame. See, the original owners of that knitting mill were at the very first convention.
And what a great way to honor the women who worked so hard for so many years to give women their rightful place as leaders in our country.
We hope Catherine Switzer's story will inspire our listeners to do all they can to work for a better world.
There are no limits to what you can do. Fun fact, once the people who ran the Boston Marathon realized that keeping people out of the race was wrong, they opened it up to even more people.
They now have people with a variety of disabilities run.
Today there are special divisions for the mobility impaired, for a wheelchair division, and hand cycle participants.
In 1967, one woman ran. In 2017, more than 1,000 people with disabilities ran.
And 13,000 women. That sounds like real progress.
I just wish progress didn't take so long.
Hey, maybe it doesn't have to.
What do you mean?
Well, one woman with courage made a huge change.
And you think maybe our listeners can help bring about change too?
I not only think so, I'm counting on it.
That sounds like a plan to me. What do all of you think?
Let us know what you'd like to see changed.
Then let's all join together and both
make change happen. Thanks for joining us for Story Tapestries, and we hope to join you again sometime soon. Good night.
All right, so we're going to take that last message that they shared, make change happen. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. In the meantime, here in the studio with us today is Katie McIntyre, who is was the race director for the Women's Right to Run last weekend. She is just a beautiful community member here in the Finger Lakes, and I have to say Finger Lakes. She's really from Auburn is where she lives, but she does so much for our community on so many different levels. And ironically, the first person that Katie met and connected to when she moved to Auburn, because that is not where she originates from, is the daughter of Karen and Stephen Beals. We were just chatting about that. So Lori Ann Beals. So that's pretty cool. So Katie's here today because she's going to share with us her own personal story, right? Because this is a woman that we see out in the community on a professional level in many ways. So she's here on her lunch hour chatting with us about her personal story, connecting with Catherine Switzer last weekend, being part of the 261 Fearless. You may not even know what that is until she talks about it. And just her journey. And we've got some different things we're going to talk about today. So,
it's good to be here.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank
you so much for coming.
It's great to be in the new studios.
I know. I'm really excited about this new studio, Jim. It's pretty cool. So Katie, share with us a little bit about this story. Like, kind of pick up where Karen and Stephen left off. You know, they shared that beautiful story of Catherine and running the Boston Marathon, which you just ran.
I did.
Right. So tell us a little bit more about that and your relationship to her.
So it's actually really cool to see Karen and Stephen talking about Catherine, and so many people got to meet Catherine. I'm glad you got to meet her and shake her hand, and probably she gave you a hug because she's just a very generous Beautiful, beautiful soul. So I had the chance to really meet Catherine and get involved with her because of the Right to Run and that idea that Menzo Case had back, probably in 2014 or 13. He thought of the idea of having a 19K race as the nod to the 19th Amendment. And I was able to join on to that project as the race director. And so we just had our second race. It just finished last weekend. And Catherine...
It was amazing.
It was great. Lots of amazing energy. People come from many different states, different Canadian provinces to run. So we had people from all over. And Catherine was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls in 2011. Mm-hmm. And so last year, she really wanted to come as our national spokesperson to give back to the National Women's Hall of Fame, which is the beneficiary of the Right to Run. So she then came again this past year, too. But in the meantime, in 1967, she ran that first race, and then this year, in 2017, on April 17th, she ran the 50th anniversary of that 1967 race.
Which is so cool.
It was amazing, and over 30,000 runners, and I was one of them. It was really cool. So last year, sometimes you put things out to the universe, and you're like, you got to be careful what you put out there because, generally those things come back and they come true. But I had done an interview with her with the Citizen newspaper, and I put it out there, and it's in writing that I hope to be on the start line with her for that 50th anniversary. And lots of different things came about, and I was able to apply, and I was accepted to the team. So there were 125 of us. Most of us were women, but we had 7 men on the team.
Wow.
From 20 countries.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was so
and
cool.
amazing to have the support of men on that team as well. With the
and it was really important because just like how women got the right to vote, they did it with help of men. They didn't do it just women. It was men and women working together. Same thing with Catherine getting to the finish line of that race. There's that footage of her big boyfriend, Tom Miller, knocking the race official, giving him a crossbody check and getting him out of the way so she could finish that race. So, it takes men and women.
Yeah, and I know you did a little bit of work in this publication to share some of these stories, which is helpful too, because I think some people are probably it's gonna pique their interest, and it'll just spur on some more research and read the article in Finger Lakes Women magazine. But also go online. There's so much information, stories shared from so many different runners, different perspectives. And Katie and I had coffee yesterday and just had the privilege of sharing an hour listening to different stories of what went on over the past couple of weeks leading up to and then around the race. And I think that the story that touched my heart the most was the one that had to do with the students from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. If you would share that was just so beautiful.
Sure. So last year and this year, one of the main goals was to get, of course, to have Catherine at the finish line and putting medals around runners' necks, but really to get her out in front of as many students as possible. And so we did that again this year, and we did a fun run with the Girls on the Run group from Elizabeth Cady Stanton School, and many of them were running with buddies in our race on Saturday too. So on Friday, we went to their school, and there were about 60 of them, and it was Catherine with 4 of her ambassadors, and I'm one of her 261 Fearless ambassadors. And we met all the girls. So the coaches introduced me, and they're like, okay, everyone, let's get together. We're going to circle up. I really wanted everyone to get in a circle so we could see each other. Yeah. And she's like, all right, Coach Katie's going to talk to us. And so I was Coach Katie. And
I love it.
I loved
Katie.
It too. And we went around in a circle, and we just introduced ourselves. And the reason I wanted the girls to do that is because I wanted them to have a chance to use their voice and to introduce themselves and to be responsible for making sure they were heard. And so all of the girls went around in a circle, including Catherine and the coaches. Everybody introduced themselves, and it was beautiful. And I thanked them for sharing their beautiful, strong voices. And then we ran to the Elizabeth Cady Stanton house. So a sea of pink. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And we got there, and then Catherine did a porch side chat with the girls.
That's great.
She shared some of her stories. And, she shares a story about starting to run as a 12-year-old girl, and she grew up outside of D.C., and she didn't have middle school, so she's going from elementary school to high school as a 12-year-old, and really running was how she built confidence. And she talked about how she thought that the way she could be popular at school, she came home and she was telling her dad and her mom, I'm going to be a cheerleader. And her dad said, you don't want to be a cheerleader. Life is for participating. You want people to cheer for you. You don't want to cheer for them. And so she was like, oh, that's a, flip it on his head. That's a totally different perspective. But she started running and played field hockey. And, she's been running ever since. She's ran her 40th marathon just, last month. So,
which is amazing.
Yeah.
People tell me all the time, like, you get to a certain age and those things aren't for you and whatever. And I just love women like her who are just like, what?
Yeah, there's so many women who are starting to run in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It's incredible.
And just starting, and that's the other thing too, is like if you haven't trained your entire life, it can be intimidating. But people are starting so much later in life, and it is what it is if you're willing to put the time in and practice. But, I want to jump around a little bit because that takes me to like, what is the kind of strategy that gets you through a marathon? I really admire you for doing it. I promised myself that by the time I hit my 40th that I would run a marathon.
Which is a pretty common goal for women, actually.
Yeah.
Lots of women, when they turn 40, want to run a marathon.
Yeah. So I'm going to wait until after 40.
That's okay.
I'm a little busy right now.
I think... everyone's approach is different, but really I listened to advice that Catherine gave directly. So we had coaching sessions by phone, and we have there's an app that we use to communicate with all of our members worldwide. But she really said, you've got to put in the time. Mm-hmm. And that's like it is for anything in life. I think as a parent, when I'm trying to help my kids learn a new skill and they get frustrated, like sometimes kids want instant gratification, and adults want it too. Like you want to try something and you want to be good at it and you want to feel good, but you have to put the time in.
Right.
Which was really hard to do because I had a fundraising goal. I needed to raise $7,261 to have my charity bib because I didn't have a qualifying time. Mm-hmm. But I also had to train so that I could go 26 miles, 385 yards.
Right.
And the fundraising was a lot easier than the running.
Right.
And a lot of it was because of time. So I have 2 little kids, and they like me to be around. So when I'm not at work, they don't want me to be off running for 2 hours, 3 hours.
Right.
So my routine was really to get up at 4:30 so that I could run before they woke up.
Wow.
Which, in the winter, it's really hard to do. And some mornings it was easier than others. But I think just putting in the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then running buddies really help.
So I started a training plan a couple of years back, actually, when I was living in Auburn, and I know what those days are like. Getting up really early in the winter and then putting in like the 12 and 15 mile runs. Like it's such a time investment, And so I think about that now because I have a just over 1-year-old, and it's tough enough to sneak away for my 1-hour podcast,
right? Let
alone a couple-hour run. So I can completely appreciate that, taking that time away to make it happen. But
it's contagious too, though. So my older son is 6, and he did a couple of runs with me. He got up early. I mean, we didn't go more than a mile, but he really wanted to. He wanted to dress in athletic stuff, and he wanted to get on his running shoes, and he wanted to be out there with me. And I think he likes the lights that I have. I have blinking things and things that are very reflective, so all the gear is really fun too.
Yeah.
But he was totally into it, and he's done a couple of 5Ks. We're going to do Waterloo Memorial Day 5K and Major Palooza next weekend, so
that's exciting. Good. It was really great to see at the race last weekend too. A lot of kids running with their parents.
There were really many families running.
Yeah, it was beautiful. So, Katie, tell me a little bit about you personally. I know that you're not from the Finger Lakes originally, and you've got one of the things I really love about talking to you is I feel like you've already had like 9 lives, right? Like you've had all different kinds of careers, and you owned a tattoo parlor at one point, right?
I did,
yeah. So we need to know more about this woman who is Katie McIntyre, right? Like, because now when I read that, I was like, really?
Yeah.
A tattoo parlor. Okay.
So I'll try to tell you the brief story, but so I was born in Rhode Island. I'm a New Englander. I think it's why I'll eat lobster whenever I got a chance.
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not from here, but so I grew up in Rhode Island, and then really most of my school years were in New Hampshire, and that's where my brothers still are. I have a twin brother, and I have an older brother, and my mom lives there, so we're in New Hampshire a lot. But after high school, almost all of my class was going to go to the University of New Hampshire, and I didn't want to go and sit in the same classroom or in the classroom with the same kids that I'd gone to school with. I wanted to meet new people and see different things. And so I applied to many different schools, but the school that I chose to go to was a small women's college just north of New York City called Marymount. And it eventually became part of Fordham University, and now it's since been closed. But it sits up on the hill above the Hudson River, and you can see Manhattan.
Gorgeous.
About 20 miles to the south. And it gave me the chance to meet people from all over the world, with international students and students from all over the U.S. And it was funny because they didn't have any students from New Hampshire at the school. So I remember going, getting on campus, and they're like, "Do you have indoor plumbing?" I'm like, "Yes, we do. Yeah. And we just got cable too, so it's like, we're okay in New Hampshire."
But how wild to go from the option of being with all the people that you knew, going to the same school, to a school where you were the only person who's from New Hampshire.
Yeah, and I didn't know anybody, but I think my whole life I've gone places where I don't know anybody. Like as a young girl, I was a Girl Scout, and I sold lots and lots of cookies. So I tend to be an overachiever. That happens.
Yeah.
But I sold enough cookies so I could go to camp free for 2 weeks in Vermont every year.
Love it.
And it was my favorite part of the summer. It was just so much fun. It's where I learned about the Beastie Boys and like all kinds of things that I didn't know about at home, but that I learned about at Girl Scout camp. So I think that is just a trend that's taken me through my life. So Marymount, and then I went to study abroad, and I was telling you the story yesterday, but in talking with my dad, he's a safety professional. He was a fire chief my whole life growing up. My mom was a nurse, so we were very safety conscious.
Yes.
So he's like, "Okay, well, you can go to London or you could go to Australia."
Right.
And I was like, "Well, I don't really want to go to London or Australia. I really want to go to Africa." So he started sending me, I would get a package a week of printed out State Department reports of the political climate of different countries in Africa. But ultimately,
his attempt at deterring you. Yeah.
Right. It didn't work. So I went and I spent 4 months in Ghana, and
Amazing.
It was incredible. It changed my life. I had experiences there, really understood what it meant to be an American woman, and the advantages that an American passport gives to people, and the perspective of, I was in villages where they hadn't seen any white people for 40 years. And kids would come and they would touch you, and you looked so foreign to them, and no running water, and just different things that we take for granted here, and we just assume we're going to turn on the water and water's going to come out, or that the power's going to work all the time.
Right.
And those things didn't happen there.
Yeah.
And I had a 6-week independent study while I was there, and I was studying traditional pottery. So I went with my host sister to the northern part of Ghana, and she was going to be my translator, because while I was there, I was studying this language called Twi, which is a dialect they speak in the southern part of Ghana, but this was a language called Ewe, and she spoke Ewe. So she came with me, and we went to the bus stop, and the way the bus stop works is you get on the bus and you wait until the bus fills up. So we were on the bus for 6 hours.
Wow.
Waiting for it to fill up before we left for our trip.
Wow.
Like that's the time schedule.
Right.
So patience training, right?
Right.
Like people would be freaking out. Can you imagine if you said that to
you
somebody,
got on the
like,
bus and you have to wait for 6 hours before yeah.
So we moved around a couple of times. Like we were originally sitting in the middle of the bus, and then some seats in the back opened up, and I was like, let's move and sit in the back. So that seat was a little bit higher, and so this was 97. And I haven't been back to Ghana, but I would like to go back. But the roads were not really well developed. So it was a dirt road, and it was one lane, and we were on a bus with probably 25 people. And, people bring everything that they need to go where they're going. So there were chickens on the bus, and there were, all kinds of pots and cooking wares and all kinds of things. So we're sitting in the back, and the bus driver starts playing chicken with another bus on the road. And it's a single lane road.
Oh.
So we're driving, and
my heart would be in my stomach.
last minute, he swerves and he hits a tree. And I go flying from the back of the bus over rows and rows of people, and I land on top of all kinds of things. People are all jumbled around. The man who was sitting in the front seat, in the passenger seat, was killed.
Oh my God.
And the woman who was sitting in the original seat that I was sitting in went under the seat in front of her, and that was my seat. And they rushed her to the hospital, and it was just like, you know, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is scary, and this is life-changing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know why I told you that whole story, but it just, you never know what the experience is going to be when you go somewhere, and I think just being open to it.
Well, it kind of ties back, you know, it's funny because your dad was deterring you, you know, because he had this issue with safety, but the reality is like that could have played out in many places, right? Like
Sure.
in different ways. You might not have had chicken on the bus with you, and you might not have waited 6 hours, but you know, life happens, and it's how we wake up to those moments that makes a difference. Yeah. Now I remember you had a connection. There was a connection to a cab driver when you came back to DC. That was really cool. And then there was a connection between somebody back in Ghana and like several generations later over here. Can you share that with our viewers? Because I thought that was really amazing. Talk about when you say like you as a person love to connect people in life, like I feel like the universe also helps you connect things that are a lot bigger.
I think
right?
so,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
So when I was in Ghana, my boyfriend at the time, his sister was a school teacher in the Bronx, and she had a student whose great-great-grandfather was the first president of Ghana when it gained its independence in the 50s.
Yeah.
It was an English colony. So this student, he was just in grade school. I would send them different postcards and letters and just updates on things that I was seeing, so that he hadn't been to Ghana, but that he could see it and feel connected to it. And she studied Ghana with them, and I had sent them different currency and different things that they could use just for show and tell and stuff. So it was really neat to be connected to that child through a woman that became my sister-in-law for a short time, but that I could help bring Ghana to him.
Yeah, and
neat.
that never would have happened without that relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It was
Now
very
the cabbie really floored me.
Yeah, so I've lived a bunch of places. I've lived all over the Northeast. Before I moved to Auburn, I lived in Pennsylvania, and while I was in Auburn, I lived in D.C. for 5 years, but during the time I was in D.C., I worked in the defense industry, and I had lots of meetings in D.C. itself, but I worked in Crystal City, so I would take a cab pretty often to go to meetings and different things. And so I jumped in the back of a cab, and I knew immediately that the taxi cab driver was from Ghana, because people from Ghana, they have a certain smile, they have a certain, there's something about them, they have an aura, they're beautiful people. And so he asked me where I was going, and so I greeted him in Twi, and he turned around like, you know, who is this woman in the back of my cab speaking my local dialect to me? It was pretty cool. Yeah. So then I just told him, you know, how I learned Twi and stuff, but he thought it was pretty cool.
I love it. Now, when you were down in D.C., you were working for Department of Defense?
I was working for a German-based company that actually I was working for when I moved to Auburn.
Okay.
Called SHOT. So I worked for the defense arm of that company.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
I was doing marketing and PR for Transparent Armor Window Systems.
Wow.
Yeah.
A little bit different than what you're doing now.
A little bit different.
Yeah. So, you know, it's so interesting, Katie, to think about a lot of the values that have governed your life. Like I hear things like, you know, persistence and determination and this whole concept of like turning obstacles into opportunities and another one that speaks to me is you know, this idea of like diversity and inclusion but it's everything. It's not just diversity from like the standpoint of like what color is your skin. It's really like diversity of life, of experience, of people, of everything. So having said that, and being able to like hear some of these things through your stories, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I told you yesterday I wouldn't have any surprises, but I have to ask you this, is, you know, if you had to say like 3 values that are really like your core sacred values, like the things that you hold most tightly to, and if you had to only pass on 3 things to your kids, you know, what would those values be?
That's hard.
It really put you on the spot with
Yeah,
this
I think the first one would be don't lose hope. I think I'm an optimistic person. I always see there's always something to be grateful for or thankful for, or something that can make you smile, even in the hardest situations. So I would urge them to not lose hope. But also I would urge them to just show up and be a part of it. Because I think more often than not, people sit back and they complain about the way things are. But if more people would just show up and lend a hand, you can do amazing things. And then I think I would just tell them to have fun. I mean, we do lots of things to have fun at my house. I mean, we try to have fun every day. Some days things are not as much fun, but like there's ways to find. I think I told you the story about my kids love to take bubble baths, and so we let them use food coloring, and they make different. There's science involved in that too, because they can mix colors and they can see how things work, and then ultimately it turns to swamp water, and they think that's funny too. But I think not following all the rules. Like, you can bend some things and you can make exceptions, and I think that's why my kids love breakfast for dinner, and I think lots of kids like that, because it seems so simple for a grown-up, but like that's a little bit of a delight when you're a kid and things are like upside down, and like, oh really, we can eat breakfast for dinner? That's so cool. Or, dessert first, and all of these things that we hear people say, but doing them every so often is really important.
Right. And saying these things and doing them are often 2 different worlds, right? And I know, like, one of the quotes that I have loved my entire life has to do with the concept of, like, people will only listen to your words for so long if they don't see you show up that way in your actions. Right. I'm coaching this group right now. It's turned into a 10-week series. It's supposed to be an 8-week series called Your Epic Journey, teaching people how to kind of go within and really get clear on these kinds of things. Like, what are your values? Like, what are the things that, it's the glue that holds your life together.
Right.
And figuring out whether or not those things are truly showing up in their life and their relationships, and if not, that might be like where some discord and disconnect comes from. And then taking it a step further and, like, how is this going to influence how you show up in the world?
Sure.
Like, what could you be doing differently to really embody these values, like on a deeper level? Like, is it a shift in what you're doing at work? Is it volunteering for this organization? Is it, changing your parenting style a little bit? Whatever it could be. And I'm really having a lot of fun with that, because it took me a long time to really know, like, what the things were that mattered to me most. I need to incorporate fun. Right, like that has to happen. But I think the 4 that I started off with were showing up, right? Because, 80% of success in life, and when I use the word success, I use that really broadly. Like, it's not a monetary, financial, or career kind of thing. But, 80% of success in anything is just showing up and being present, right? Like, that's the other piece of that. And then do the work. Like you said, get in, be part of it. But also do the work when it comes to ourselves too. Like, I think in life, if we could work more on ourselves than on our things, like our career or, this artificial checklist that we have in life that we've got to get things done, then I think people would be a little bit happier, maybe. And stay connected, because we're better together, right? That's another reason why I really wanted this show. It was right after Jack was born. I bumped into Jim like a couple of times, and it was like, okay, this is my sign. We talked about doing this a few years ago. Let's do this now. If it's the 1 hour I escape my house to be able to connect with humans that I adore, awesome. Because some weeks, it really is the only hour.
That's good. It's an important hour.
Yeah. And then the fourth is make it matter. And I take this on the microscopic level of like, okay, in a workout or in a yoga practice or anything, even meditation, you can sort of just be there doing it, or you can really do it, and the extent to which you are present is the extent to which that opportunity or experience is going to matter. And life is that way, right? So everyday life is that workout. Everyday life is that practice, and so the more we really engage and the more that we get present with the people around us and the things that we are doing, the more it matters in this world, right? Like everything. And I used to talk about this. So before I left the 9-to-5 to work for myself, I was, my last incarnation of my world of finance, because that's where I was for 10 years, was as the finance manager for Seneca County Human Services. And I would have these conversations with my employees all the time, because the civil service system was really set up almost like a pecking order of like, here's the lowly positions and then here's like the management positions and whatever. But to me, like the person who was opening the mail was equally, if not more important than the person who was sitting in the county manager's seat, because if they didn't get their mail, then they didn't know where the heck they needed to be or what they needed to do or follow up on, right? So we rely on every part of life to work and work well in order for life to be enjoyable for all of us and for us to enjoy that broad sense of success, right? So those were my four.
Right, and we have to work through it with, whatever else is going on in our life with maybe things that are lacking and, aren't there and aren't as ideal as you would want. You have to work through all of that too.
Yeah,
whether
absolutely.
It's a rainy day or maybe you're not involved in something and you don't have communication that would help you do your work better, or whatever. Nothing's perfect, so we have to figure out how to navigate all that. But I remembered one other thing I wanted to tell you with my kids, which
and then we have to talk about the tattoo parlor.
So the other thing that I like to do at home is we have mandatory kitchen dance parties. So if we have to change the mood in the house, because sometimes things can get crazy. I have 2 boys and a dog, and it's my husband and I, and sometimes, there's cars and trucks and stuff all over the place, but sometimes just change the mood and pick some cool music. And my kids like Katy Perry, so it's usually Katy Perry, but
that's fun. That's super fun. I'll have to share a video with you that I think I posted on Facebook one time when I was super stressed out. Jack was like 5 months old maybe, and he just would not stop crying. And that's what I did. I had a dance party in the kitchen while I was food prepping, because every week I set aside like a block of time to get the meals done, because otherwise that's another thing that just goes by the wayside. And I just danced through the whole thing, and he thought it was hysterical.
That's great.
And I'd stop and let him check himself out in the mirror and like see us bouncing around. He thought that was really funny too.
That's great.
So yeah,
fun.
Yeah. So tell us about your tattoo parlor. I'm so curious. I have one tattoo. I swore I would never.
It's not
have
really
one.
that amazing of a story, but
well, it just shocked me. I have a lotus.
Cool.
So I'll tell you my story about the lotus after you
Okay.
tell me your story about the parlor.
So I call it my live and learn period, but I got married right out of college, and my now ex-husband and I opened a tattoo studio just north of New York City in a little town that really didn't want us to open a tattoo studio. So we learned a lot about town boards and about ordinances, and we had a great lawyer. And so now, the shop is gone, but there's a tattoo shop in that place because we made it so that shop was allowed, but no other tattoo studios could be put into the town.
Wow.
So we pretty much eliminated competition for anybody else, but we learned a lot during the time. And so, I used to not do tattoos, but I used to run the desk and order the supplies and pay the staff. And
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I feel like you've had such an incredibly eclectic lifetime of experiences, but yet they all seem to perfectly lead you to right where you are today.
No, that's how life works, right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And we just have to like stop and connect the dots and pay attention.
Yeah, and fun stuff. I mean, I've
Yeah.
nannied. I've spent summers on the vineyard with a family that I took care of since I was 11, and I've waited tables. So I had my own lobster fisherman that I would leave the restaurant and pick up lobsters and take them home to my family.
That's
and
great.
I've bartended. I think that it's all skills that help you communicate with people and help people, and
Yeah.
a lot of perspective. I don't think people should be allowed to actually eat in a restaurant unless they've worked in a restaurant. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you would be a lot nicer.
Yeah.
It's just perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the same thing where I totally support people getting outside of the United States, getting outside. There's people who live in our area that have never left our area.
Yeah.
And you really need to leave to get perspective, to come back, and to realize that it's not so bad. And
Yeah.
I think that's why, especially, I live in Auburn, and there's a lot of things going on there with the national park and with the welcome center, and there's a lot of concern over parking. And I mean, I've lived in big cities. I've lived in Brooklyn. I've lived in Washington, D.C. I grew up, driving in Boston,
Yeah.
and it's okay to walk a couple of blocks to your car.
Right.
It's not so bad, and
Right.
it's healthier for you too. So you don't have to park like right in front of where you need to go. It's okay to park a little bit further away, or you could ride your bike, or you could walk.
I think it's so helpful to help people see things differently in those moments. I had a conversation with some of the city officials at one point about how, as a resident, because I was living in Auburn at the time, I thought it was super, super exciting that we were having a problem with parking. Because
Right.
it meant that something was going on
Right.
in our city. And back to my finance career, I had been on the team of auditors for the city for about 5 years prior to that. And so, that meant the world to me, but also like the demographic in Auburn was shifting too. And you were just seeing like this like great concentration of young families,
Mm-hmm.
like wanting to raise their families there and really contribute and make something of the area. And we're seeing that kind of happen, like little sparks ignited all throughout the Finger Lakes.
Sure.
So that makes me really happy.
Yeah, and we loved, my older son was born in D.C. at Georgetown, and we loved living in D.C., but it's really expensive.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great things. I miss the food for sure.
Yeah.
Somehow I'm going to figure out how to get a Thai restaurant into Auburn. But
I drive to Ithaca right now for my Thai food. Yeah.
I've been making it, but I'd love to be able to get takeout sometimes when I don't feel like cooking. That would be really nice.
Yeah.
So that's on my long-term goals. But Auburn's a great place. There's really cool stuff. And from 2005, when I first was transferred to Auburn, to now, the downtown is, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people see it, but sometimes people still, like, they get into this rut of just, like, complaining about things. And it's like, okay, just take a step back and look at what's been achieved and look at all this cool stuff.
Right. Yeah. I know I shared a book with you yesterday that I thought you would like, and I think our readers would love it as well if you want to read about that kind of thing. But there's a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, which talks about, facing your final fear and like living this great life, which I feel like is so, it's so the topic out there right now. Everyone's talking about living this great life, but sometimes it's these simple shifts. And what he talks about is the fact that like very early on in life, we have this thermostat that was created around how much joy and how happy and how like full we could feel our lives. And I feel like the people who are like the constant complainers, like their thermostat just got set at this place where like they're never going to go beyond like a certain level unless they begin to question it and push beyond it, right? And go like, wait a second, like I can be happy with my life here in this city where I have great conveniences and I'm close to the things that I love, but also knowing that it's thriving and taking off, and that might mean I have to park, 2 blocks away. Right. Just different ways, different perspectives, as to how we look at life. So I'm really want to give anyone out there who wants that nudge to read that book, The Big Leap, and reset your thermostat. It's like the way I see people experience this a lot in life is with these kind of sabotaging behaviors. It's like, you know, you'll be having this really great time, like in your relationship or your marriage or your family, everything's going along good, and so then like you find a way subconsciously to kind of like muck something up or have an argument with somebody at work or, you know, something, because it just keeps this equilibrium and it keeps you in that setting that is normal to you, right? So if we can set our thermostat to know that like we can experience this incredible joy like across the board in life, and then just go out there and do it.
Yeah.
You know, it seems so simple, and it really is. It just takes work.
Yeah.
Right. And like that kind of introspection.
That's why we have a whole long life to learn,
to keep learning,
and to become self-aware, and things change all the time. So you have new, you know, a young child, or, you know, different things with parents aging, or maybe something changes at work, and like we always have to adapt and work through it. I think if you have your constant stuff, the things that you know that bring you joy, and that always make you like, that's like, go for a run, and I know it's going to clear my head, and I'm going to feel better than when I started.
Yeah. Or
go out in the garden. I turned my front yard into a raised bed garden, and just have enough lawn to mow through between the beds.
Yeah, and you know that that's going to bring you joy.
Yeah.
So like you need a shift, you know, you plug in, and that's where you go. I love it. Yeah. So I'll tell you my story, my Lotus, really quick. So there was a time in my life where I like many people that I talk to and network with, you know, I hear this story all the time. Like, we feel if we are one thing, then we cannot be another. So I was going through this period of life where like I was just really focused on the past and some difficult stuff I had gone through and a lot of adversity, which everybody goes through, right? We all have our own struggles, and they're all relative to who we are and our own experiences, right? And our perception is you know, my thing could be like my jeans don't fit right, and yours could be like I don't have food to eat tomorrow, right? But like in our minds, we perceive our thing as a struggle. Anyways, there was so much struggle that I felt like I just couldn't get to this other side, you know, of like living a happy life and being content and being full of joy. And I felt it in there, and I would write about it and I would dream about it, but it wasn't out there in the world, right? It's like I kept it all to myself because I had to be this person who struggled. And so my Lotus was poignantly placed right there for me to see every single day, to remind me, you know, the lotus blooms from mud, right? Like those roots are like deeply entrenched in this murky water, and above the surface blooms this amazingly beautiful flower, right? But you have both, and you will always have both. Yeah. And that is life, right? And so that's my constant reminder, like, to the extent that we experience those struggles, like we almost literally owe it to the world to bloom even greater and to shine brighter, to raise the awareness around those things and show people that like you can overcome anything. You are not any set of circumstances. Right. It's all those things we talked about before, like the persistence, the determination, the ability to delight and create joy, and all of those things.
And one thing I didn't say, which I think is for me the most important thing, is we all just need to be kind. And I think that, you know, everyone does struggle, and it shouldn't take that someone has to reveal that struggle for you to be kind to them. I think the kindness needs to be extended always first. Right. And that's something that I really try to teach my kids, because everybody has hard stuff. Life is hard. Yeah. And if we're not nice to each other and kind and understanding, like, what do we have? Yeah. You know?
We make it that much harder.
Yeah. And I've had that experience where people have said to me, like, you know, they've been drilling me on something. I didn't do something for them. And they're like, you know, you didn't do this and this and this. And I'm like, you know what? I was at the hospital because my son stopped breathing last night. Oh, well, you didn't tell me that. Well, you know what? It shouldn't take me to tell you that. Right. Extend it. Right. Like all extend it. Right. Doesn't cost anything. Yeah. So... And I say that with Laura Colburn too. Like, we like to remind each other that kindness is always in fashion. Like, we may change our clothes, but kindness, you can wear it everywhere you go.
I love that. Kindness is always in fashion. Yeah, and in my business, the way I extend this to a lot of my business partners and colleagues is like I constantly remind them that my assumption is that we are always doing the best with what we have at the time. Right?
Yeah.
And so if we can just assume that and not that someone's trying to like do something wrong or hurt you or they're trying to get away with something, you know, if we operate from that place of abundance and just give the love, extend the gratitude, the kindness and those things without needing to know what's on the other side,
Right.
then the world would just be a better place. Yeah. So we're going to wrap up because it's about 10:01 now. But I hope that for those of you who've been watching my podcast now for the last couple of months, or since last fall now, actually, you know, I typically have clearly identifiable segments in our show, right? Women who make the world a better place, men who make a difference, out and about in the community, and ideas and inspiration. But today, ladies and gentlemen, you got it all in one. Right, we're here, and Jim is definitely our man making a difference today, because just having this studio here for us to be able to share our stories and hopefully, you know, touch somebody's life. You know, we never know, like one story can shift somebody's perspective on something they're going through, or inspire them to do something different, or give them that nudge for, you know, some wake up call in life. So thank you, Jim, for having us here today. And we have Katie here as a woman who makes the world a better place, but also tied it in with all of the events going on in the community over the last few weeks, out and about in the community. And the ideas and inspiration to leave you with are, like, what are your core sacred values? Like, what are the rules that you live your life by? And are you really living life by those rules? Because we owe it to ourselves, you know, to walk that line, to be the integrity in our lives, so that we can do that for our children, for our communities, for the people around us, and so that we can live what we consider to be an epic life. So thank you, Katie, for being one of my everyday heroes.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you.